They gave the new nurse the stroke patient in room 7 because nobody wanted him. That was the honest version. The version Donna Raines told was kinder. The rotation schedule just worked out that way. But Vivian had been at Eastbrook VA Medical Center long enough to understand how cruelty disguised itself in a hospital. It put on a badge. It smiled at administrators. It said things like rotation schedule when it meant watch this. Welcome to Hidden Badges Stories. I'm glad you found us today. If you believe that the quietest person in the room is sometimes the most dangerous one to underestimate, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from tonight. I read every one. Now let me tell you about Vivian. Vivian Hart had been at Eastbrook VA Medical Center for 14 days when Donna Raines decided she needed to understand her place. Donna was the charge nurse on the 3rd floor Veterans Unit, 42 years old, 14 years on the floor, and she ran the station the way a general ran a forward base, with total authority and zero patience for anyone who hadn't earned the right to question her. The younger nurses called her efficient. The older ones called her necessary. Nobody called her kind. Vivian was 36. She had warm brown eyes, a calm face that most people read as nervousness, and a pair of bright blue scrubs she wore every shift like they were the only thing she'd brought with her to this new city. She didn't talk much at the nurses' station. She didn't laugh at the jokes. She took notes in small, careful handwriting and asked questions only when she needed to, and she never, not once in 14 days, pushed back when someone handed her the worst assignment on the board. That, Donna had decided, was the problem. She's too quiet, Donna told Ryan Chu, the second-year resident who had a habit of lingering near the printer when he had nothing better to do. Quiet nurses get walked on, or they become the ones doing the walking. I haven't figured out which one she is. Give her Greer, Ryan said, that'll answer it. So that was how it happened. Donna tapped the assignment board with one finger and said, Hart, room 7, Nathan Greer, he's all yours. 2 nurses at the medication cart went still. One of them set down her cup. Ryan lifted his phone just enough for Vivian to notice. Vivian looked at the board, then at the chart Donna handed her without comment. She didn't ask for background. She didn't look alarmed. She said okay the way someone says it when they've already made peace with what they're walking into, and she turned down the hall. Donna waited. The station went quiet around her the way it always did when someone walked toward something nobody wanted. That particular quiet had a texture to it. It felt like anticipation. It did not feel like concern. Nathan Greer was 53 years old, 6'2", and a former Army Special Forces medic, 18 years in uniform, 6 deployments, and a chest full of citations the VA paperwork had reduced to a 2-line summary. He had been admitted 4 days earlier after collapsing in his son's kitchen in Raleigh. The ear diagnosis was ischemic stroke, posterior circulation, left side intact, right side impaired, speech production severely disrupted, what the intake forms called expressive aphasia. What the forms didn't say, because no one had stopped long enough to understand, was that Nathan Greer was completely alert, completely oriented, fully aware of every conversation that happened around him, every decision made about him, and every face that walked through that door. He just could not make his mouth produce what his mind composed. His words came out wrong, or not at all, or scrambled in a way that made people lean back instead of forward. He had tried a whiteboard. He had tried writing. He had tried pointing at things until a second-year nurse took the marker away and said, "Let's not agitate him," like he was a dog straining at a leash. After that, he stopped trying with most of them. The chart on the door read, combative, non-compliant, difficult to assess. A red note flagged him as altered mental status, etiology unclear. Dr. Patrick Hollis, the attending neurologist, had written in yesterday's note, patient remains non-cooperative, psych consult pending. Nathan had read that note when the med student left it open on the overbed table. He hadn't been able to say a word about it. When the door to room 7 opened again, he was sitting up against the wall with his arms folded, and his eyes tracking the entrance the way a man tracks exits when he knows the building isn't safe. Vivian knocked twice on the frame before she entered, then she stopped. She didn't rush to the bed. She didn't hold up a tablet or a laminated picture board the way the last 3 nurses had, the ones who'd spoken slowly and loudly as if the problem were his ears instead of his speech. She stood near the doorway with the chart in one hand and her other hand visible, and she looked at him the way people only look at someone when they're actually trying to see them. "My name is Vivian," she said. "I'm your nurse today. I'm going to pull that chair over and sit near you. Not right next to you, just in your line of sight, and I'm going to go through your chart out loud so you know exactly what I know. Stop me if anything's wrong." Nathan stared at her. She pulled the chair over, sat down, opened the chart, and began to read. She paused at the things that were wrong about it. She said, "This says you've been refusing assessment. That's how it was documented. I'm not assuming that's accurate." She looked up. "Is there a reason assessments have been difficult?" His jaw tightened. He reached toward the whiteboard on the overbed table. the one someone had placed out of reach, and glanced at it. Vivian stood up, handed it to him, and sat back down without a word. He wrote in large, unsteady letters. His right hand was weaker than it should have been, and the writing listed to one side, but it was legible. They don't listen. Then I will, she said. He studied her for a moment. Then he wrote again. New weakness right side today, worse than yesterday. Vivian stood up immediately. She assessed his grip strength. Right side markedly weaker than it had been in the previous nursing note. His facial droop was asymmetric. His swallowing reflex on water was delayed. How's your vision? She asked. And she held up 2 fingers and moved them slowly, and he tracked them and then looked away when the movement made something in his head go wrong. Double, he wrote, this morning. She counted his respirations. She felt his pulse. She checked the IV site and looked at the telemetry strip and asked him to rate his headache on the board by writing a number. He wrote, 7. Then he wrote, yesterday was 3. She stepped back. I need to flag this to Dr. Hollis. His assessment needs to be updated. You may have some extension of the original stroke. He watched her face. I believe you, she added. Not because he had asked, because he hadn't needed to. Something shifted in his expression. Not gratitude exactly. More like the particular relief of a man who has been shouting into a room where everyone had their ears covered, and one person finally turned around. He wrote one more thing before she left, not about symptoms. He wrote it in a shorthand that took up only 3 characters, and it was not English, and no civilian nurse in a hospital in Raleigh had any business knowing what it meant. Vivian's hand went still on the chart. She looked at what he'd written, then she looked at him. He watched her face the way you watch a door to see if it opens. That's not something I'm familiar with, she said. But she said it a half-second too late, and she said it to the chart, not to him. Nathan Greer had spent 18 years learning how long it took a person to construct a lie. He knew the interval. He tapped the whiteboard. She looked up. He wrote, Who are you? Your nurse, she said. Before. The room held that question. Vivian capped her pen. Someone who has seen a lot of different hospitals, she said. He looked at her left forearm. The sleeve of her scrubs had shifted when she'd leaned over to hand him the whiteboard. There was a scar there. Thin, horizontal, old, the kind that didn't come from a kitchen accident or a childhood fall, the kind that had a specific origin if you knew what to look for. He wrote one word, not a real name, a call sign, the kind that moved through certain communities and certain circles when a particular kind of person needed a reference. Rook? Vivian took the whiteboard, erased the word, and handed it back. I'm going to call Dr. Hollis now, she said. Her face had gone still in a way that was different from calm. Calm was passive. This was something controlled on purpose. Nathan said nothing. He leaned back and waited, the way a man waits when he knows something is coming and has decided to trust the person standing between him and it. Dr. Patrick Hollis arrived 6 minutes later with the particular energy of a man who had been interrupted during something more important. He was polished, mid-50s, gray at the temples in a way that had probably always worked in his favor. He looked at Vivian's vitals sheet, then at Nathan, then at Vivian, in that order, which told her everything she needed to know about where he placed the relevant information. New weakness, Vivian said. Right side grip down from yesterday's nursing note. Gaze evoked double vision this morning. Headache up from 3 to 7. Swallowing reflex delayed on water. Hollis picked up the chart. Patients with aphasia often present with agitation and somatization. It's not unusual. This isn't agitation, Vivian said. His baseline right side deficit is worse than documented. That's a change in neurological status. Ryan appeared in the doorway. His phone was in his hand. Hollis set the chart down. Hart, I appreciate the thoroughness, but I've been managing this patient since admission. He has a complex presentation and a history. Repeat imaging, Vivian said. He needs a repeat MRI. The posterior circulation needs to be reassessed. The window for intervention in basilar artery territory extension is not your area of expertise, Hollis said. His voice had gone flat. Document the vitals. I'll reassess this afternoon. His oxygen saturation is dropping. His headache doubled overnight, he told me. He told you, Hollis said, and he smiled in a way that was not a smile. He has expressive aphasia, Hart. His communication is not a clinical assessment. It is not admissible as evidence of anything. Nathan held up the whiteboard from the bed. It said, she is right. Hollis glanced at it. That's not a clinical assessment. Vivian stepped closer to Hollis, not threatening, just close enough that she couldn't be talked around. His oxygen is at 91. It was 95 on admission. His headache worsened overnight without documented cause. He has new diplopia and progressive right side weakness. That is a change in neurostatus. It needs imaging. I'm asking you to order it. And I'm telling you to document and step back. Then Nathan's monitor alarmed, heart rate 112, blood pressure 178/102, oxygen saturation 89. Vivian was already moving. She hit the rapid response button on the wall before Hollis reached her. "What are you doing?" Hollis said. "My job." The announcement broke across the unit. Rapid response room 7. Rapid response room 7. Hollis reached for the cancel panel. Nathan reached from the bed and caught his wrist. Not hard. Precisely. Hollis stopped and stared at Nathan's hand as if the math of the situation had suddenly changed. "Release," Vivian said quietly. Nathan released. Hollis stepped back. He looked at Vivian the way men look at things they have underestimated and cannot immediately recategorize. Dr. Yolanda Park arrived first. She listened to Vivian's 30-second summary, timeline, baseline, changes, suspected extension, and she turned to Nathan and assessed him with the kind of efficiency that didn't require apology. "He needs imaging," Park said now. "I was about to order," Hollis began. Park looked at him, "Then let's get it done." Vivian stayed at Nathan's eyeline while they moved him. She held up one hand, slow breath, "I've got you." He signed something back, not formal ASL, something abbreviated, the kind of physical shorthand that didn't have a textbook name. She understood it anyway. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes did. Just for a second. The way a door closes on something you didn't mean to open. Nathan noticed. He almost smiled. The imaging showed what Vivian had suspected. Posterior circulation extension, basilar artery territory. The kind of finding that, caught in the window, changed the outcome entirely. They were still inside the window. Barely. The thrombectomy team was in the room within 40 minutes. Park stood at the door while they prepped Nathan and looked at Vivian. "Good catch," she said, 2 words. They landed harder than Vivian expected. She looked at the floor for a second. Not from modesty. From something older than that. A room she used to know that had smelled like dust and diesel and copper, where she had made a call exactly this fast, and the person on the receiving end had not been as lucky. She pushed it down. Nathan needed present time, not history. Ryan had stopped filming somewhere between the rapid response alert and Dr. Park's arrival. His phone had disappeared into his pocket. Vivian had seen it happen. She filed it away. 2 hours later, Nathan was in recovery. His blood pressure was stable. His oxygen was at 96. Donna found Vivian in the supply room. She stood in the doorway for a moment before speaking. When she did, her voice was smaller than it had been that morning. "Administration wants to see you." "How's room 7? "Park is with him." "Then I'll go." Donna didn't move immediately. "I thought it would be funny," she said. "That's the honest answer. I thought you couldn't handle him and I wanted to watch. Humiliation is rarely funny to the person experiencing it." Donna flinched. "I know that now." "Did you know it before?" Donna didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. "Figure it out," Vivian said. "Then come back and tell me when you have." The administrative conference room was on the 4th floor, away from alarms and beeping monitors. Gerald Stone, the hospital administrator, sat at the head of the table. Hollis sat to his right, Ryan beside Hollis with his arms crossed, Donna in the chair nearest the exit. "Nurse Hart," Stone said, "sit down." "I'm fine standing." Stone set a folder on the table. "We're reviewing an incident involving escalation of care without attending authorization." "The escalation caught a posterior stroke extension before the intervention window closed," Vivian said. "He's in recovery now." "That doesn't change the question of protocol." "No, it changes the question of outcomes." Stone looked up from the folder. "You seem unconcerned for someone potentially facing termination." Vivian said nothing. She had been in rooms where the penalty for the wrong answer was measured in something heavier than employment. Hollis opened a folder of his own. "There is another concern. The patient appears to have communicated something to you in a shorthand that isn't documented." Stone looked from Hollis to Vivian. "What does that mean?" "Ask him." "We're asking you." Vivian turned toward Hollis. "You should be careful about the direction this goes." "Or what?" "Or the question of why you failed to order timely imaging becomes the central document in this file, instead of what I wrote on a rapid response form." Donna sat straighter. Ryan's arms uncrossed. Stone raised a hand. "This meeting is about protocol. It should be about the 14 days this patient spent in this hospital being labeled altered and combative, because no one took 90 seconds to give him a whiteboard and wait," Vivian said. "That is the incident worth reviewing." The door opened. Park walked in with Nathan's updated report. She looked at the room, took in the arrangement, and set the file on the table without being asked. "I heard there was a review." Stone said, "This is an internal matter." "It's a patient safety matter." Park looked at Hollis. "Sit down, Patrick." He sat. The room shifted. Park placed her hand on the file. Nathan Greer presented with progressive neurological decline that was documented by the bedside nurse and flagged for urgent reassessment. The attending delayed. The nurse escalated. The patient is alive and recovering. She looked at Stone. That is what happened. I'll defend it in writing. The door opened a second time. Nathan Greer stood in the doorway in a hospital gown with an IV pole in one hand. A step-down nurse stood behind him, horrified, explaining she had tried to stop him. Nathan paid her no attention. He looked at Vivian. You shouldn't be up, she said immediately. He held up the whiteboard he'd carried with him. He'd written before he left the room. The letters were slow but clear. She saved my life, you mocked her, you no-gurred me. You called me altered when I was screaming in silence. Vivian read it aloud for the room. Hollis started to speak. Nathan looked at him. Hollis stopped. Nathan wrote one more line and held it up. Rook was there. The room went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with politeness. Stone said, "What does that mean?" Nathan pointed at Vivian. Park looked at her. "What is Rook?" Vivian said he should go back to bed. Nathan shook his head. He wrote fast, letters uneven with effort. She knows cold lead, 2019. Army SF support, she was there. Stone stared at Vivian as if the picture he had formed of her was wrong. Hollis said quietly, "What are you?" Nathan's knees buckled. Vivian caught him before anyone else moved. "Chair," she said sharply. Donna moved fast this time. Park grabbed the IV line. Ryan, to his credit, was already at the door calling for oxygen. They got Nathan into the chair. His pulse was rapid, his pressure dipping. Vivian kept her eyes on him. "Stay with me. You walked here with a fresh procedure site. That was not your best decision." He wrote on her palm with one finger, "Worth it." She held his hand still. "Breathe, don't write." His eyes found hers and held. Park called for transport. As they wheeled Nathan out, the staff in the hallway had gone quiet. No one was laughing. Something in the building had changed. Later, after Nathan was settled, after the federal investigators arrived with credentials and questions about Operation Cold Ledge and a defense contractor whose faulty equipment had contributed to 3 Special Forces casualties in 2019. After it came to light that Ryan's footage, captured in the minutes before he'd thought better of it, had documented the entire rapid response sequence, including Hollis's refusal to act, turning a would-be spectacle of humiliation into a time-stamped record of clinical negligence. After the inquiry expanded from a patient safety review to something considerably more serious, Vivian sat beside Nathan's bed in the low light and wrote in his chart, with the same controlled handwriting she used for everything that cost her something. Nathan watched her. "You stayed," he wrote on the board. "You were my patient. Before." The room held that word the way the first one had. She put the pen down. The old guilt had a specific weight. She had carried it from one continent through 4 years of reserve service to a nursing degree she'd finished at 33. Because taking care of people was the only work that felt like penance and purpose at the same time. "You made the call on Cold Ledge," he wrote. "The right one. I made it late." He shook his head. He wrote slowly, his right hand steadier now than it had been that morning. "You made it in time. That's the only time that matters." The words landed somewhere she hadn't expected them to reach. She looked away. She checked his chart timestamp. She verified the drainage line. Nathan wrote one last sentence and held the board up. "I woke up without words. I didn't wake up without someone who listened." She didn't answer that. She didn't need to. Colonel Miles Ashby arrived the next morning. He walked through Eastbrook VA with the quiet authority of a man who had learned not to need volume. He looked at the investigator's summary. He looked at Hollis, who had been removed from the case by then. He looked at Donna, who had overnight chosen to cooperate fully with the inquiry, rather than protect the people who had used her. Then he looked at Vivian. "Sergeant First Class Vivian Hart," he said. "Special Forces Support Medic. Medically separated 2021 under sealed record following your testimony in the Cold Ledge contractor review." The administrator stood near the wall. His face was the color of old paper. "The contractor's attorneys knew Greer was here," Ashby said. "Someone inside this hospital was passing access to his file." Hollis, from the corner, said nothing. Ryan said very quietly, "He told me it was a records audit. He said I was helping." "You were helping," Vivian said. "The wrong person." Ryan's face collapsed inward. "I wanted them to like me. That's the whole reason. I know how that sounds." "You used a patient's vulnerability to buy approval," Vivian said. "You're going to carry that. Let it make you careful." She wrote 6 policy documents and put them in front of Gerald Stone before the week was out. No patient with a communication disability to be labeled combative before a documented attempt to establish their primary communication method. No imaging delayed beyond clinical indicators due to attending preference alone. No nursing staff assigned a patient as punishment or entertainment. No access to patient records without logged clinical purpose. All stroke patients with aphasia to receive speech-language consultation within 24 hours. Mandatory training for every nurse, resident, and attending on communication access for veterans with acquired disabilities. Stone approved all 6, he signed them in silence. Ashby offered her extraction, a new placement, a quieter post. Vivian looked through the glass at Nathan, who was arguing with a physical therapist about the timing of his gait training, winning the argument entirely through whiteboard and expression. "No," she said. "You understand the risk of staying." "I understand the risk of leaving." Ashby studied her. "What do you want me to tell people who ask about Rook?" "Tell them she got a nursing license." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I'm giving." 3 weeks later, Eastbrook VA looked the same from outside. Same parking lot, same flag, same coffee from a machine in the lobby that everyone agreed was terrible. Inside, things were different. Room 7 had a communication board mounted to the wall. The staff lounge had an ASL basic sheet with more signatures than anyone expected. Donna was in the first cohort of the new training, arriving early to every session. A staff volunteer on the second floor had seen Vivian leave a whiteboard in a room for a patient who didn't have a documented communication need, and asked her why. "Because the board should be there before someone has to fight for it," Vivian had said. The volunteer ordered 12 more from supply that afternoon. Nathan was discharged on a Thursday. He stopped his wheelchair at the nurse's station, the same one where the assignment had been made 23 days earlier, and asked Vivian to translate what he'd written. She read it aloud for the floor. "You thought silence meant he had nothing to say. You thought her quiet meant she had nothing to give. You handed her the hardest room on the floor because you wanted to see her fail. Instead, you watched her do the one thing none of you had managed in 4 days. She listened. That's all it took. That is all it ever takes." Nobody moved. Nathan tapped her hand. She looked up. "Don't hide anymore," he wrote. "I'm not," she said. "I'm right here." His son met him at the doors and pulled him into a hug that Nathan didn't pull away from. Vivian watched from the second-floor window until the car was gone. Ashby found her there. "You know this won't be the last time someone comes looking." "I know. And you're staying anyway." "He spent 14 days in this hospital with a full mind and no voice," Vivian said. "And the whole building called him broken." She stepped back from the window. "Someone has to stay and fix that." Ashby nodded once, not a salute, something older than one. "Rook," he said. "Hart," she answered. She straightened her badge and walked back to the nurse's station. It said Vivian Hart, no rank, no call sign, no record that anyone without clearance could find. She had come here to disappear. She had stayed to be seen. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, that is exactly where the most important work gets done. In the quiet rooms, by the quiet people, the ones who have already survived the fire and come back carrying something more useful than anything they left with. They come back carrying the will to notice. And on the day that matters, that is enough.